talk about the internet and privacy, Jennifer Granick is on the show. Jennifer is the director of civil liberties at the Center for Internet and Society at Stanford Law School. She was also the keynote speaker at this year's Black Hat Conference, and in her address, she talked about how she thought the internet would, quote, leave behind the shackles of age, of race, of gender, of class, even of law. But 20 years on, cyberspace looks a lot less revolutionary than it once did. So Boom Bust correspondent Bianca Ficini got a chance to speak with Jennifer at the conference and asked her how we got the internet so wrong. Here's what she had to say.
So, the idea is that technology would be liberating in all these ways. And, primarily that the internet was going to make it possible for us to have access to all this information without corporate shaping or government censorship, and that we would, this would bring us all together in a way that was transcendent from race and class and gender and age. But that turned out not to be true. And some of that, I think, is that old habits die hard. People have these entrenched ways of being, and it turns out that racism and sexism are strong enough and resilient enough to thrive even in the technology world and, and even online. In terms of the access to information, the internet was built in this decentralized way. And the idea was that, people could decide what they wanted to do. The pipes that carried the traffic wouldn't decide. But what's ended up happening is that we've seen this real centralization for a variety of reasons, from economic, like business models, to people wanting better services and them the services being able to be more effectively provided through centralization. So we have the whole issue of platforms like Facebook or one, or monopoly even, where one company owns most of the fiber optic cables. And what happens when you have that centralization is that it's a choke point, and that choke point is a focus for government regulation.
In April of this year, you co-wrote a letter to lawmakers in opposition to 3 bills proposed in Congress: the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act, the Protecting Cyber Networks Act, and the National Cybersecurity Protection Advancement Act of 2015. So what specifically was wrong with the bill proposals?
So the letter from April was regarding information sharing bills. And the idea behind information sharing is a good one, which is that when people know what vulnerabilities are out there, they can then patch their networks and look to see if they've been attacked by anyone using those vulnerabilities. So the idea is a good one. But every one of those bills has a critical flaw. Or 2 critical flaws. And the flaw is that they broadly define information that can be shared to include very private data, and then they waive privacy law. And they say companies will have immunity if they violate privacy law in sharing this data. So basically these bills are end runs around the very weak and sketchy privacy rules that we already have in place. And not for any good reason, because the kind of information that we need to share in order for people to know what the vulnerabilities are and make their network safer generally doesn't include private information that's protected by statute. So the whole fundamental structure of these laws is wrong. And in the letter, technologists were trying to explain to lawmakers that the kind of data they need isn't the kind of data that's private. So instead of saying, don't worry about protecting private data, say, share this information.
An investigation published in The Intercept demonstrated that the Department of Homeland Security monitored the Black Lives Movement, and they were also watching a funk music parade and a breast cancer walk. So, this is pretty crazy to me. What kind of impact do you think that this type of surveillance has on social movements in our country?
The problem with surveillance is twofold. One is it scares people. And so people then are afraid to participate in political movements or to express their opinion or even to read online, because they're afraid that they're going to be spied on and then have that information used against them. So it has this chilling effect. But the second problem is that it really upends the balance of power between individuals and the government, because when the government knows everything about you, they can do anything. Everybody has secrets that they want to keep, and when you know everything about somebody, you can figure out exactly the way to bring someone down, even if they haven't already done something wrong. So it gives the government this huge amount of power, and that also is dangerous to political movements, which are inherently about trying to change the balance of power and make government and our society better. So it is a really serious problem. But it's a problem that we should know better about. I mean, we've had for years reports on the Department of Homeland Security and fusion centers and the kinds of things that they're spying on. And, we regularly spy on what I think everybody would agree is the wrong people. And we spied on Occupy, we spied on the breast cancer march, now we're spying on Black Lives Matter. This is not, we've got better things to do.
Do you think we'll ever see right to be forgotten laws in the U.S., and why or why not?
We will never see right to be forgotten in the United States. The right to be forgotten is an abomination under U.S. law. It's basically removing truthful information that's already been published from the public internet, and the First Amendment would not allow that. I think it's substantively a fiasco because the idea that we're going to censor truthful information, to me, is just wrong. The information was published for a reason. It is part of the historical record, and I think that there's something really disturbing about trying to hide facts and edit the historical record. So that, I think, is just bothersome. I think it's a fiasco in implementation because the standards are so loosey-goosey. The court that found that the European Union has this right, talked about whether things are irrelevant. And irrelevant isn't really a good legal standard. It's very complicated to figure out what's irrelevant and then to balance relevance with the public interest, which is also an amorphous standard. But rather than do the hard work that a court should do, a democratically responsive court should do, and figure out exactly what the parameters of this new right are and when it should be respected and when it shouldn't, the court just basically punted the whole issue to a private entity, Google, and tried to say, okay, Google, well, we don't really know, but you decide, you figure out the cases.
Final question. Do you think as society advances with technology that we'll continue to see this battle between privacy and security?
I don't believe in the war between privacy and security. I think privacy can protect security. For example, if you have privacy is important for journalists and human rights workers. Without it, they can be targeted and attacked. So they need privacy for security. And I don't think that we need to trade off privacy to get security. Locking cockpit doors is an example of a security measure that helps us without trading off privacy. So I don't think there's a zero-sum game there or like a seesaw. We have choices there. But there's no question that modern technology means a lot of information collecting, and that is a problem. It's a problem in terms of whether we will be manipulated by companies who know everything about us and whether we will be targeted for prosecution or surveillance or underhanded tricks by governments that know this stuff about us as well.